Welcome back to Culture Pop. So, this Friday, we are diving into some of the biggest headlines, the biggest stories of the day. There is a lot that we need to get into. A lot has been happening, and we're going to start off with a couple of media stories. We're going to finish off with something a bit fluffy, fun, but still in the vibe of media, movies, and content that is influential, shall we say. Let's get into it. The first story that we have to talk about is Jimmy Kimmel. Now, a lot of you may know some of the ins and outs. I'm not really going to get into all the ins and outs here, but just at a very high level, we know that Charlie Kirk was killed by an assassin last week during eclipse season on, I believe it was the 10th, right? Jimmy Kimmel made some comments in one of his opening monologues about the president's reaction to Charlie Kirk's death, talking about building his ballroom and all these things. And the Cheeto in chief didn't like that, didn't like kind of being called out for the kind of callousness of his remarks. And then also he made a comment about the potential alleged affiliations of the killer himself. And so Cheeto in Chief doesn't like any of this. The results are that Jimmy Kimmel's show gets taken off the air and is suspended. Rightfully so. Many people said, ho, 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 what's going on, ABC? What's going on, Disney? I thought that we had freedom of speech, right? And even though you are private companies, it seems like you're being influenced by the government to make decisions and to take comedians off the air. So what's going on here, right? And there was a big uproar and people started boycotting Disney. So people started canceling their Disney Plus subscriptions, canceling their Hulu subscriptions, canceling their ESPN, I think as well, subscriptions as well, in protest of this, saying, hey, not in our country. I thought we had freedom of speech. I thought we had democracy. What we don't like, how the media is being manipulated by the government. That's not supposed to happen. So because of this, there's been a lot of numbers thrown around, right? There's a lot of numbers thrown around. Not all of them have been substantiated. So online, there was a number of saying that Disney lost $3.87 billion off its market cap, from these boycotts and from people canceling. That has not really fully been proven. Some people say the number's more like 1.5 billion. Some people say that's just the normal fluctuation of the stock market that happens on a daily basis. Billions come and billions go. So who knows exactly what is correct here. But we will say that it's been very interesting just from a media perspective to see that, well, after the final eclipse on September 21st, the next day, the autumn equinox, September 22nd, Jimmy Kimmel is coming back, right? So now the company says that they are bringing him back. He will be returning to ABC less than a week after the show was indefinitely taken off the air. The Walt Disney Company says, we have spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy. I'm sure you have. And after those conversations, we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday, a spokesperson said to CNN. So really interesting. Over 400 celebrities had backed Kimmel and spoke out against the government threats to our freedom of speech in an open letter organized by the ACLU. So obviously pressure was coming from various different places and, power to the people, I hope. Some decisions were made. So this whole thing that happened, though, what I kind of wanted to bring in here is obviously there's some concerns, right? The freedom of speech, media being controlled by the government, et cetera, et cetera. And also it's interesting how quickly this was reversed. And I think a lot of people are looking at this with hope, right? With hopeful eyes saying, hey, maybe we do have power. Maybe that power is in our wallet. Maybe that power is in our vote, but also in our dollar. So if you look at the eclipse, this all happened during eclipse season, start to finish, right? So September 7th was the first eclipse in Pisces, as we see here on the screen as well. And the last eclipse of the year happened September 21st. So The day after that, things were resolved and things quote unquote go back to normal. So interesting, right? And maybe you too, as you're listening to this, had some eclipse chaos happen in your life and maybe it's been resolved, or maybe some realizations have been had. But nevertheless, no matter what has happened or what you feel about it, eclipse season is always going to eclipse. It's always going to do its thing. Okay, so keeping with the theme of media, I wanted to move to our second story of the day, which is the TikTok sale. Okay, we have to talk about this. You know, TikTok is one of my primary platforms right now. It's a big one. I encourage lots of my clients to have a strategy for TikTok. It is an incredible place to get attention on your business, on your work. And it's a place where increasingly people are turning to for their news, right? So if we look at TikTok as, you know, it's media, it's not just social, it's social media. Last Friday, so again, in the midst of eclipse season, right? There was this decision. The final decision hasn't been made, but an announcement talking about the sale of TikTok. And it looks like there's going to potentially be an agreement between the Murdoch family and the Ellison family. Ellison specifically has been in the news. The founder, owner of Oracle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And both of these families, as we know, are billionaire families that are really big in media. So you know, it's opened up this whole conversation, just like the Jimmy Kimmel story, about ownership of media, influence of media, future of media. So I want to bring in, for your consideration, the planet Uranus. So we know that Uranus is in Gemini now. The planet Uranus switched. You know, it spends about roughly 7 years in each sign. It's been in Taurus for a while. And this is the planet of disruption, innovation, and sudden changes. So Uranus and Taurus looked like, you know, money changing, right? Bitcoin coming in, cryptocurrency, you know, all of these kind of changes around money, around health, around the body, around these kind of foundational structures, even around food and how we understand how our food systems work or don't work, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of that happening in Uranus and with Uranus and Taurus. Now Uranus is in Gemini. We're going to have a little bit of an autumn encore. So let me give you some dates here. Uranus moved into Gemini July 7th. This is very important for this conversation about media, especially social media. So July 7th. It's going to be there until November 7th. Then from November 7th to April 25th of 2026, next year, we're going to have an encore of Uranus moving back retrograde into Taurus. But then from then on, next April 25th until August of 2032, so in total over a span of about 7 years, we're experiencing this Uranus in Gemini. So why is this important? Well, Gemini is the sign of commerce. It's a sign of business. It's the sign of social. It's the sign of media communication. All of these things are under Gemini. And, you know, when I look at the future from an astrological perspective, and I look at this moment that we're in, and I look at all these changes, you know, the Pluto return of the United States, the nodal shift, you know, all of these different moments, Neptune finally moving into Aries, Saturn moving on into Aries. When I look at all of these shifts that we're having in this kind of, there's a lot of once in a lifetime astrology, right? The thing I worry about most is Uranus and Gemini. This is the one. I'm not even as worried about Neptune and Aries. I know some people are. I'm very worried about Uranus and Gemini because Uranus moves fast and it means massive change. And it's happening around technology, communication, and social. And these are areas, this is how we relate, right? This is how we relate to each other. We're social beings. Human beings need to be and have to be in relationship with each other. And a big way that we are currently in relationship with each other, we connect, we share, you know, is online. And so it's really interesting to think about how, I'm going to give you a stat here that's a bit scary, but important to know. In 1983, 50 companies controlled 90% of media. Guess what that number is today? So rewind it back. 50 different companies were, owning newspapers and social and, well, I guess social media didn't exactly exist at that time, but all the different media, and we're talking Hollywood as well, so like 50 different companies, news, etc., controlled 90% of media. What is that number today? I want you to give a guess before I tell you. Six. Six companies today control 90% of media. And most of them are run by billionaire families. We're talking a handful of families: the Ellisons, the Murdochs, Bezos, Ox Sulzberger, and Roberts. Only really Disney and Netflix are not really controlled by billionaire families right now. That's a frightening stat, in my opinion, because it means that we are being fed certain messages, or we could be fed certain messages if a handful of people in the world decide that that's the message they want to send, right? 90% of media. So media literacy has never been more important. Literacy in general, I mean real literacy in being able to read and being able to conceptually understand what it is that you're reading, is so important. There's a really important conversation about literacy going on right now online. And this isn't only a problem in the US, this is a problem in the UK, this is a problem everywhere. And media literacy, knowing what is true and what is not, what is real and what is not, what is manipulation and what is not, that is going to make a big difference to our future. So let's watch with our eyes open and watch carefully to see what happens to the US version of TikTok. Let me tell you, if you guys do end up separating, I'm going to be so sad, because I'm going to be on rest of the world TikTok, and you guys in the US, my incredible US audience, which is about, I think, 60% of my listeners, are going to be on a different platform from me, seeing different information from me. If that happens, don't worry, we'll meet again. We'll find other places. Find me on Substack. Okay. Subliminal messaging. Okay. So let's go to our last story of the day. A little bit lighter, a little bit more kind of fluffy and interesting. So here we are. Woo, 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 woo. Okay. Do you know what that music is from? That is from, well, that's my voice, but it's from one of my current favorite shows. Yes, on Disney Plus, The Mandalorian movie. Or The Mandalorian. Now there is a movie coming out, and they just announced this a couple of days ago. So we got to talk about it. Okay. It's had a very mixed reception. There's a lot going on for Disney right now. They're stressing a little bit. But Mandalorian has been a very, very successful show for the Star Wars empire, should we say, or maybe that's not the right word, the Star Wars franchise. So The Mandalorian has been incredibly successful, and not only, due to the script, the story, the visuals, but also, of course, the stars, Pedro Pascal playing the main role. Now, instead of announcing a fourth season, they're now announcing a movie, which is going to come out next year on May 22nd. And if you're watching on YouTube and Substack, you can see the hand painted, Star Wars is famous for having the hand painted posters. You can see that poster here, and it says at the bottom, "This is the way," Mando's catchphrase. So it's interesting. I wanted to kind of bring a little astrology into this because, I looked it up and I was like, yeah, what are people saying about this? What are they excited? Are they excited? Are they not? Some of the feedback, and we'll look at the astrology as well. So some of the feedback on this, looking at the trailer, said it doesn't feel like a movie. And I thought that was an interesting thing for people to be upset about. They're like, it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like a TV show. It feels like the same as like watching the TV shows. I don't know how that's a problem personally, but I guess maybe they wanted it to feel more epic or something. I'm not really sure. But I think that strategy actually matches with what a lot of studios, movie makers should be thinking about, because ultimately most people end up watching these things on streaming, on TV, right? And so they're going to watch on their TV. They're not necessarily all going to go to the theater. That's just the way that movies are headed. That's just what's happening, is is that TV now is like, even production quality of TV is equal to, if not greater than, movies right now. And people are much more excited for the next season coming out often than the next movie. And so it's interesting just to think about, how is that really a critique of this or not? But nevertheless, a lot of people seemed upset about that particular point. Also, people seemed upset that this series, they feel, is aimed at younger viewers. I don't agree. Just because there's not a lot of gore, or it's not rated NC-17. I don't see why this is only for younger viewers. I love this show as well, and I'm an older viewer. Well, not that old, okay? Simmer down. But I'm an older viewer as well. But I think it deals with a lot of very adult themes as well. So I'm not quite sure why that's a critique either. And isn't it smart for Star Wars to start bringing in some younger viewers too? I don't know. Anyway, so highly recommend this series. I'm in this process of watching all of the Star Wars stuff in order, not in chronological, but in order of the story. So I just finished the Boba Fett, which was forgettable, but I'm now on Mandalorian season 3. So that's where I am currently. If you want to watch along, please do. Let me know how you like it. But yeah, something that's interesting about this movie, well, actually a couple interesting things. I think one of the main things that I love about it is that the central story is not like about conquering something, and it's not about romance. It's about friendship. And I think that that is really interesting, and it's very Pisces North Node, and it's very much something that I think is a popular topic, and maybe a cure for the pervasive loneliness of our time that a lot of people are talking about. Loneliness at all different age brackets, all genders, etc. The Mandalorian really addresses that, because he is a solo character that finds a friend. So I love it. Okay, but let's talk about the astrology. So it's really interesting. The release date, I don't know why, I just instinctively wanted to look this up. And I have not been deep in Star Wars lore my whole life, so forgive me if this is something that everyone already knows. But, Star Wars movies tend to be released in May. And of course, we know May the 4th be with you, right? May 4th is considered Star Wars Day. And this is something that was not a PR thing. This was not created by George Lucas or by some agency. This was fan-led, that they said, look, May the 4th is Star Wars Day. And they say, May the 4th be with you. I've always known that since college, right? But it's interesting to look at how the release dates have lined up across the Star Wars movies. So this particular one, Mandalorian and Grogu, comes out May 22nd. Now, if you know your astrology, you know that makes this a Gemini, right? So it's a Gemini release. And this is very significant to Star Wars fans, because it's 6.5 years since the last Star Wars movie, which was the third trilogy, the most recent trilogy, the final movie of that. And everyone's been wondering, what's the next movie going to be? I heard that, there's so many different Star Wars movies in production or at different stages, right? Some may be at the scripting stage, some may be at the casting stage, some are in shooting. Like there's actually a movie, I think, that's being created right now that is about Lando Calrissian, which I'm really excited. I would love to see that. I think that would be really exciting to see his story, a little side quest. But this one is being released first. So this is big news, right? That's finally dropped. May 22nd, a Gemini release. But how does that stack up against other Star Wars movies? So I have a visual here, but I'll talk about it for those of you who are just listening to me. So Star Wars release dates have been traditionally in May until the most recent trilogy. So the first trilogy, 1977, it was May 25th was the first release of the first movie, Episode 4, A New Hope. So May 25th, 1977, the first Star Wars movie came out. What I think is interesting about this is all three of these movies were released in late May, and they're all Gemini releases. But it's close enough to George Lucas's birthday. I said, let me just look, when is his birthday? And I looked up all the birthdays of the directors. I looked up also Kathleen Kennedy's birthday. I was just curious, like, when all these things happen. So George Lucas's birthday is May 14th. So he's a Taurus, right? And so he's famously the creator of the Star Wars saga, following Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, et cetera, in structure. And so he was born May 14th of 1944, and I have his chart here. You can see that he not only is a Taurus, he's also Taurus rising, he's Taurus Venus, he's Taurus Mercury, he's Taurus Sun, of course. And then he also has an Aquarius moon and what is that? Capricorn midheaven, just for anyone who's interested. But there's a lot of Taurus energy in there, isn't it? So love that for him. So right after, not long after his birthday, he would have seen, his work come out. So I'm sure that that was purposeful. Of course, they're going to say, well, it's not for that. It's for, catching the summer movie bandwagon. But, I think it was also partially because of his birthday. So Gemini, right? This series, connected so many people, right? There's so many fans, so many clubs, so much merch, so much lore, so much fan fiction. To me, that feels very Gemini. Now, it's interesting that the following series, the prequels, as they're known, episode 1, 2, and 3, also were released in May. So they continued that tradition. So in 1999, 2002, 2005, those stories were released in May, but those were all Taurus dates. So we moved from Gemini to Taurus. People didn't really, they weren't really well received, were they? If you remember, the prequels are not well loved. And I think they're starting to get a little bit more of a resurrection now, because people look back and they're like, why were we so mean, to Anakin, the guy who played Anakin? Why were we so mean? But they were kind of looking back on it, and now it's nostalgic. So now they're having there's a bit of a resurrection, but Taurus energy. Then we fast forward, and I don't know why, but they decided for the final trilogy, which also was kind of, some of the fans loved it, some of them didn't really like it very much. The final trilogy was all Sagittarius release dates. So all three of them, December 18th, December 15th, December 20th, 2015, 2017, 2019. I don't know why they decided to switch. Presumably they were like, oh, let's get the Christmas crowd or something. But it seems strange that they completely left the Star Wars tradition. They broke with Star Wars tradition and went to a Sagittarius release date. So in this, way, this is not something that's like groundbreakingly important, but I think it's really interesting, and it shows a desire to return to nostalgia, to return to what Star Wars is known for, the incredible friendships and relationships within the story, the hero's journey, taking down the Empire, all the things with Mandalorian and Grogu. So having this release date go back to May, go back to Gemini season, I think is a return to original Star Wars lore. So I think that's pretty fun and pretty cool. So as Mando always says, this is the way. If you have any culture pop stories that you would like for me to cover, if you're like, oh my gosh, I need to hear your thoughts on this, what about the astrology of this, please do not hesitate, do not be shy. Email me, message me on socials, comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube or Substack. I would love to hear, what should we dish about next?